full agenda. Thank you. I know we have a full agenda today, so we will go ahead and get started, and want to welcome everybody to the Thursday, August 4th Lunar Committee meeting. I will ask if everybody will please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, well, thank you. It's good to see everybody. I'm sorry I missed, for those of you that were at lunch as well, sorry I missed you. Like I said, I'm trying to prepare for going out for a few days, so I unfortunately missed lunch, but I heard it was a good meeting, so welcome to everybody else as well. So let's go ahead. Robert, anything off the top before we go to roll call?
Yes, just a few housekeeping announcements. Good afternoon, everyone. This meeting is being recorded and streamed over the internet. For members of the public, we accept and encourage public comment and have provided options that are listed at the top of this meeting agenda. For our committee members attending in person today, thank you for coming. We're happy to have you. Please note that you have a table microphone in front of you. Please don't pick up or move the table mics, as this will result in feedback. You can speak at a normal volume and the mics will transmit the audio into Zoom. Simply hit the button to unmute yourself. Green light indicates your mic is live. Red means you are muted. For our committee members participating online, thank you for joining us today. Please mute your devices when you're not speaking and use the raise hand feature in Zoom should you wish to comment. Would you like me to go to roll call?
Yes, thank you, Robert.
All right, directors, when I call your name, please indicate your presence. Director Bullahan.
I'm here.
Frost.
Here.
Gallardo.
Yes.
Gore. Absent. Harris.
Here.
Kennedy. Absent. New.
Here.
West.
Here.
Vice Chair Baines.
Present.
Vice Chair Clark-Kretz.
Here.
And Chair Saragosa.
Here.
We have a quorum.
All right, thank you, Robert. We'll move on. Do we have any public communications this afternoon?
There's no public comment at this time.
All right, thank you. We'll move on to the consent items. Any questions on those? Any public comment on the consent items?
There's no public comment on consent.
Okay, I will entertain a motion. I see Pierre raising his hand. So I have a first there. Thank you. And I have a second
from West.
All right, second from Director West. Roll call, please.
All right, directors, when I call your name, please indicate your vote. Director Bullahan.
Aye.
Frost.
Aye.
Gallardo.
Aye.
Gore. Absent. Harris.
Yes.
Kennedy. Absent. New.
Here. Yes.
Thank you. West.
Yes.
Vice Chair Baines.
Aye.
Vice Chair Clark-Kretz.
Yes.
And Chair Saragosa.
Aye.
Motion carries.
All right, thank you. All right, moving on to our action items and then to item 3, and that's the adoption of the Mather Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan update. And Mr. Chu has this report for us this afternoon.
Hi, thank you. I'm Greg Chu. I'm on your planning staff. I also serve as the staff person for the Airport Land Use Commission. Some of you may not know that SACOG serves as the Airport Land Use Commission, and the board itself is the commission. Periodically, we have items that relate to the ALUC, and today is the culmination, or this month is the culmination of a plan that we've been working on for the last few years. So I also want to introduce 2 members of the project team, Glenn Rickleton with Sacramento County Airports. He's the planning manager, and he was instrumental in getting this project to move ahead. And also Chris Jones with ESA. He's been our consultant on this project. So what you're being asked as a committee is to make a recommendation to submit this to the full board serving as Airport Land Use Commission to adopt a plan, which I'll describe a little bit more about the background. So go ahead to the slides, please. Okay, so this is Mather Airport, south of 50, just near the city of Rancho Cordova. Next slide, please. So as the Airport Land Use Commission at SACOG, the purpose, this is a state law, is that we've been designated to serve as the commission, and basically is to make sure that we have compatible land uses near airports, to make sure that we have safety factors and other considerations for airport operations. So specifically, your role as board members are in the coordination of compatibility planning. The main way in which the board does this is through the adoptions of this long acronym, the ALUCP. That's the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan. So periodically for each airport, we have 16 in the 4-county region. We have plans for each one, and then we periodically update them based on current practices and operations and things like that. So, and then as we get plans or as we get development applications at your local agencies, if they're near airports, then we at SACOG take a look at it and make sure they're consistent with what the plans are. And I mentioned we're the Airport Land Use Commission for 4 counties, Sacramento, Sutter, Yuba, and Yolo counties. El Dorado and Placer counties are each their own Airport Land Use Commissions for those 2 counties. Next slide, please. So what's in ALUCP? So the big thing is we want to make sure that future land uses are compatible with airport operations. So there's 4 key policy areas that we consider: the noise of the aircraft and the surrounding uses. Safety, which is probably the most important one. This is to make sure that if anything were to go wrong, we would minimize impacts on safety. Airspace protection is another way for height. You know, there's certain places you want to put cell towers, but you don't want to put it right at the end of the runway. And overflight notification, that's a subjective measure of impacts to airports. So one important note is these ALUCP plans do not apply to airport operations, so or anything on the airport property. This is all on the property adjacent outside of airport property that the plans address. Next slide, please. The role of your staff is to bring you policies and draft plans for review. And this helps implement the plans by working with local agencies, reviewing individual applications near airports, issuing consistency recommendations to the board. And then we also serve Caltrans. Caltrans is the one that has the overarching coordination in the state, and they're the ones who provide the guidelines. And of course, there's state laws that affect this. Next slide, please. So from the local jurisdiction standpoint, meaning the cities and counties in the 4-county region, we update all the land use plans to be consistent with the airport plan. We work in coordination with one another. They submit development applications to SACOG for review if it's near an airport. One thing in all this is the state law allows for cities and counties to do an override if there's a reason that has something other to do than the airport objectives, why they want a development to happen. Perhaps it's an economic reason, perhaps it's whatever the reason is. The governing bodies of those, each jurisdiction has the ability to override the SACOG review on it. It needs a 2/3 vote. So in a jurisdiction with 5 voting members, it would need 4 members out of 5 to overrule it. The local jurisdiction would also have to follow the procedures that are outlined in state law for documenting the reasons for that. Next slide, please. So why are we doing the update to the Mather plan? So it's 25 years old. It was last updated in 1997. Combined with the airport master plan, which is about how the facility and operations are done at the airport. The county did that fairly recently. And our plan, the ALUCP, needs to kind of be consistent with that. Airport operations have changed. Aircraft have changed. procedures have changed, federal requirements have changed for the operation of airports. All that comes into play. And again, over the last 25 years, we have a lot of reasons to update this plan. Plus, there's a lot of new development being planned around Mather. So this plan was requested by the airport operator, which is Sacramento County Airports, that we update this. Next slide, please.
Greg, just real fast, a quick question. There's no statutory like dates that we had to compete. I mean, obviously it's a long time since the last one. So this is just timing because things have changed so much, nothing statutory.
There's nothing statutory. There is some guidance though that the state says, they say roughly every 20 years, but it also depends. We have some very small airports that haven't changed much at all. And they're gonna, those plans are well over 20 years. But in this case, Mather is a major economic driver for the region. Lots of operations going on there. So for that reason, now is the time to do it. When we started this, it was 20 years old, and it's taken us a few years to get to this point. So.
Understood. Thank you, Greg.
Absolutely. So what's in the plan? We have general policies for operations and how compatibility should work. And then really the heart of the plan is, or what's called the compatibility factors. And I'll just go over those in just a second. We also have appendices that provide background information about the airport layout and other data. Next slide, please. So here's just a schematic of how this works. Is we have different layers. These are the compatibility factors. So you can see the runway kind of in the green there at the very bottom. So those are the areas that are most concerned to us, which is safety. So if something unfortunate were to happen, statistically, we know if an accident were to happen, we have an idea of where it's most likely to happen. And those areas we want to keep as clear as possible. And then we kind of feather it out depending on the likelihood of an accident to be there. And we have different safety zones depending on where our property is in relation to the runway. Noise is another factor. There's a certain noise gradient that happens. These are community noise equivalent levels, and we have contours for that that the county has run, and they have an idea of where it's going to be bothersome and where it's okay. Airspace protection is, again, height. As you're closer to the airport, you want to make sure the size of your facilities or buildings don't impede in that regard. And then overflight is the subjective assessment, and that's of impacts to noise or impacts to airports, such as single event noise or wildlife hazards and things like that. Next slide, please. So this is just a real quick example of the noise. So these areas are the ones that, as you get closer to the runway, it's noisier, and as you get farther out, and depending on where the airport operations and the flights come in or out of, you want to make sure you have compatible uses accordingly. So next slide, please. So we would take that, and depending on which ring you're in, we would look at what the land use is proposed for that particular site and to see whether or not it's allowed or not. This is the heart of what's in the plan. So if we have a land use that residential being the most common, if there are certain areas that you don't want to have it in, or if you do, then you want to have it with conditions such as for sound to buffer the sound noise. Next slide, please. This is also the same thing with safety. There's certain areas that are much more likely to have incidents, and those areas we want to keep as clear as possible. And then depending on where you are in relation to the center line of the runway is where safety factors increase or decrease depending on where. For instance, you don't want to put a movie theater where there's a whole lot of people compact in an area off the runway. You'd want to spread them out. You'd want to have maybe a park or something that is less dense and people can see if an accident were to happen off the end of the runway. Next slide, please. So the plan, it's been 5 years in the making for different reasons, but we have worked with all the affected jurisdictions that are listed here, including school districts and Caltrans. They helped us shape the plan over that time. Next slide, please. And what's being brought before you as the committee is whether or not to forward this to the Airport Land Use Commission. And if you do, then at the board meeting, we'll go over just, again, what's the Airport Land Use Commission do, what's in the contents of the plan, and what's happened through the public review process, and then take action to adopt the plan. It's also an action to take is to adopt the environmental document that we did for this. So last year, we prepared a revised draft plan that we released for public comment, as well as our assessment on the impacts. It's called development displacement analysis. As part of the CEQA document that went out for public comment. We did a public meeting on that. And then there's been a couple of conversations that have happened. Next slide, please. There's been a few conversations that have happened between the county and one of the development interests. Those discussions have concluded, had no changes to the draft plan that was developed last year. So we're at a point now where we're ready to adopt. So with that, we'll be glad to take any questions. Again, Chris Jones from ESA Associates and Glenn Rickleton from Sacramento County Airports and myself will be glad to take any questions.
All right, thank you, Greg. Gentlemen, I see Director Frost has a question.
Thank you, Chair. Greg, thanks for the update on this. And I was wondering, because this was about a year ago that we were having these conversations around those developments that were future developments and concerns around land use. So we worked through all that, correct?
Yes, we did. So it was mainly Sacramento County and the development interest. There were some details about procedure and what happens with this if this plan gets adopted. So those concerns were initially identified in the letters that are part of the CEQA document, attachment C. But since then, the development applicant has formally withdrawn those comments. Yes, those issues have been resolved between the county and the development interest. If Glenn or Chris wish to add any further detail, feel free.
This is Glenn Rickleton, Sacramento County Department of Airports. I'll just add concurrence with what Greg said. Those issues were worked out, resolved satisfactorily, and while we've taken steps at the county level with the stakeholder to work those things out, by rescinding their comment letter, it's going to allow, if the board sees fit, the airport land use compatibility plan to move forward without any sort of restriction or condition.
Great. And I'm just curious, did we make any adjustments to the lines in those negotiations, or?
Not to the lines in the ALUCP. We worked with the land developer to condition their proposed land use development plan to be compatible ultimately.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other questions from directors? All right, seeing none. Any public comment on this item?
There's no public comment.
Okay, I had one question. Is there any major change from the 1997 version of this till today? That, I mean, just as a highlight, I'm not talking about anything super technical, but I know the patterns have changed in terms of the types of aircraft, but just wondering, what if there's anything other significant changes to the plan.
Well, I'll give a high-level comment. So yeah, I mean, aircraft have changed over that period of time, and operation changed. The flight paths have changed. The noise form that comes out of it. The noise contours have evolved, and the safety is much is more constrained and concentrated where the safety zones are. Again, if Chris or Glenn wish to add anything, but those are the high level impacts of the plan.
Hi, this is Chris Jones from Environmental Science Associates. The guidance provided by Caltrans has changed and been updated since 1997. It's more detailed. And so the plan reflects the changes in Caltrans guidance since that time. So as Greg pointed out, for example, we have 6 safety zones, whereas the 1997 plan only had 3 safety zones. And that's because of the update, both in the knowledge related to land use compatibility planning, but also the guidance provided by Caltrans.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Greg. And I appreciate that. I wanted to just bring it out a little bit more just for the record, in case anyone comes back from the public and wants to hear, wants to see what we're voting on here today. Okay, any other comments or questions? All right, and Robert, did I ask you already for a public comment on this one?
You did, and there's no public comment.
Okay, all right, thank you. I will entertain a motion.
So moved by Frost.
Thank you, Sue.
Second by Galdo.
Thank you, Jill. All right, we have a first and a second. Any other comments? Seeing none. Roll call, please.
All right, directors, when I call your name, please indicate your vote. Director Bullahan,
Aye.
Frost,
Aye.
Galdo,
Aye.
Gore, absent. Harris,
Yes.
Kennedy, absent. New,
Aye.
West,
Yes.
Vice Chair Baines,
Aye.
Vice Chair Clark-Kretz,
Yes.
and Chair Saragosa.
Aye.
Motion carries.
All right, thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us today, Chris.
Thank you.
And Alex. Yes. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to item 4, which is an update on Green Means Go technical assistance. And Garrett has this item for us. Thank you, Garrett.
Great, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members of the committee. So the item relates to Green Means Go, and it's actually more of a budgeting item, but I want to take a step back and just remind ourselves what we mean by Green Means Go. So Green Means Go is SACOG's newest program. Its tagline is accelerating development in infill areas in locally adopted green zones. So most all of your cities and counties have adopted these green zones throughout the region. And I think you'll always recall the region collectively was successful in bringing forward and sorry, did I freeze? I see some of the videos have frozen. Am I still going well? Okay, I was having some internet issues earlier. Great. The region was successful in bringing forward that $34 million in state funding for Green Means Go, which we're very excited about. And most of that new funding is going to be through the Green Means Go funding round, which is live right now. But actually, this item is about a companion effort. So Green Means Go funding round, where most of the funding is live, we actually have call for projects. So this committee will be seeing some recommendations by the end of the year about most of that funding. But again, as a companion to that funding round, we have these technical assistance activities, which are meant to fit together very well. And so we're really fortunate to be able to offer this technical assistance under the Green Means Go umbrella, free to charge to the cities and counties in the region. So again, Green Means Go, the funding round and the technical assistance activities. There's actually 2 different technical assistance activities. One is an effort that we're doing with the Urban Land Institute, and we're focusing on 2 corridors. One in unincorporated Sacramento County, the North Watt corridor, and the second in the city of Folsom, their central business district on Bidwell. So that's the first technical assistance activity. And again, a great way to pair that is the second technical assistance activity, which is up in the Yuba Sutter part of our region. It's with the cities of Marysville and Yuba City. We're wanting to bring forward just the fact that we're moving forward with these technical assistance activities. We're really excited about them. You could see in the 2 separate attachments sort of the scopes of those 2 different efforts, but really it's about helping these jurisdictions get the resources they need to help those corridors or sites get ready for development. So it's kind of one of the common themes of the effort is what does it take to get development in those corridors or in those sites from a marketing, from an economic, from a development perspective. So both those technical assistance activities are ongoing, and they'll convene they'll culminate in the fall with their deliverables. This committee has actually already acted, giving staff the direction on those, but we're actually coming back to you because the first activity I talked about, the Sacramento County City of Folsom technical assistance activity, we're coming forward to you this afternoon with an updated budget. You'd already directed our executive director, James, the authority to move forward with the contracting. But the budget we had scoped out at the beginning, we're coming back with an updated budget. The reasoning behind that, we've been working closely with ULI, that's the Urban Land Institute, the Sacramento region chapter, as well as their national chapter back in DC, about what we want to accomplish in this technical assistance activity and what would be the best scope to implement on that. And so something we've really emphasized is, while this effort's focused on those two corridors, North Watt and Sacramento County and the city of Folsom, we want lessons learned that resonate throughout the whole region. So what's the best scope to implement on that? The fact that we're doing two corridors is actually a novelty. This type of activity that ULI does, it's usually just one corridor, but we're adamant that we want to have two. And then finally, we want to make sure that our regional affiliate of ULI fit well within the technical assistance approach. It wasn't just the national efforts. Of course, we want to bring the national experts in. That's part of the fresh look value add, but we wanted to make sure that the regional affiliation was also well represented. So again, this effort culminates in this sort of panel workshop, but there's a lot that builds up towards it. And there's a lot of tangible deliverables that we really think justify the effort. For example, we talked about the development economics. The two jurisdictions, Sac County and the city of Folsom, will have sort of the technical pro formas about what it takes for development to pencil, design renderings, architectural materials, marketing. So there's a lot of stuff that culminates. I know you probably don't all remember it, but I was here earlier this year, and there's questions about what exactly the panel entails. So it culminates in the panel, but there's these tangible deliverables that bring up to it. So it brings us to today. Originally, we had a budget of $120,000 for these technical assistance activities. We're asking today for the committee to recommend the updated budget for $135,000. So it is an increase of $15,000. It's covered by the state grant that supports Green Means Go. And then the reasoning is some of those points I spoke to, right? The two corridors instead of one, the ability to, forever we learn from this effort, to be applicable across the whole region, and the ability to have both the regional and the national ULI affiliate be involved. And that's the justification for the updated budget. So again, it is an action item. Even though you had already directed James the authority to move forward, since the budget changed, we wanted to come back for this committee, just make sure it was still aligned with what you see is of the value. So that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions you have.
Thank you, Garrett. We have any questions?
Through the chair,
Yes,
move to approve by Baines.
thank you. We have a first. We have a second from Director New. Okay, I'm going to go ahead. If there's no other questions, I'm going to go ahead and open up for any public comment.
There's no public comment.
All right, I'll bring it back to the board. Any other comment? I'll make one comment. Oh yes, Director Frost. Thank you.
This is probably not a good question, but what is the?
There's no bad questions, Sue.
Oh, yeah, right. I forgot. What is the, this is really exciting. I wonder what the timeline is on that and if there's a public process with it. Because I know the community on North Watt will be super excited about that.
Yep, absolutely. It's a public process. And so the first part of your question, Director Frost, the timeline, this is going to be a fall workshop up in North Watt. And so we're working very closely with County of Sacramento and City of Folsom. And part of their contributions is sort of being the conduit of bringing the relevant stakeholders. So very much the ULI people that come out from the national level want to be talking to business owners, community members, property developers in those two corridors. And so there will be the interview phase, there'll be sort of the data collection phase, and it'll culminate in a public outward facing sort of workshop. So very much, the specifics will be worked out over the next few months, but very much when we culminate with this effort in the fall, it will be rooted in that community and the opportunity for the community to weigh in on this.
The fall of
this year. Yeah, so it's a quick move in. One of the reasons we want the action now is we want to get that contract all dotted and cross the T's, because we're moving on wanting to get this technical assistance the fall of 2022.
Thank you very much.
All right, yeah, that was actually going to be my question, which was just the underscore the timing on it, which I know it's soon. So this is great. And I know I want to just give kudos to staff because we've really, put ourselves, I think, in front of the line from not only a regional perspective, from a state perspective, just with Green Means Goes and those funds that had come available to the state. So I'm hoping as time goes by, we'll be in line for even more of that funding as those get allocated. So with that, I did have a first and a second. So we'll go ahead and have roll call, please.
Okay, directors, when I call your name, please indicate your vote. Director Bullhine,
Aye.
Frost,
Aye.
Gallardo,
Aye.
Gore, absent. Harris,
Yes.
Kennedy, absent. New,
Aye.
West,
Aye.
Vice Chair Baines,
Aye.
Vice Chair Clark-Kretz,
Yes.
and Chair Saragosa.
Aye.
Motion carries.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Garrett. Thank you, Clint. All right. We're going to go ahead and move on to our information items. And item 5 is our update on the Citizens Transportation Tax Initiative in Sacramento County. And James has this for us today. And James, I'm assuming you're there in the boardroom.
I'm here in the boardroom, Chair Saragosa. I don't know if you wanted
All
to
right.
kick this off at all, given your involvement in it, or you can certainly wait until after I conclude.
Yeah, I'll make a few comments and then I'll shoot it over to you, James, to clean up anything I'm sure that I'll leave out. But one, again, I want to really want to thank James for all the work on this. This was not easy, and I think there was a lot of frustration even on the front end of this, as negotiations really weren't moving very much. And so, this was on the brink of probably completely not going anywhere, where all parties would have gone to their respective corners, and I know that would not have been a situation that would have worked well for anyone in this agreement. So first off, I do want to thank, and for Mr. Maurer, who's coming in late to the game here as well, for providing the legal expertise as well. As we got this MOU put together. And really the MOU, how I would frame it as it is a really good memorandum of understanding. It's not everything we probably wanted, but I think that's part of what the negotiations entailed as well. And so not every party in this got everything that they wanted. Which to me is usually a good sign that there was probably a pretty good deal put together. Nobody walked away completely happy on this thing. And I always think that's a good sign of where we went. And this is just me speaking as part of, being part of these negotiations and I was, one of the counties that, I was outside of Sacramento County. And so I wanted to make sure, when we heard that this could potentially hurt the 6 regions, that wasn't going to be the case, and 2, that it wasn't going to put El Dorado County at a disadvantage as a part of the 6 region SACOG board. And as we went through it, one of the things that really struck me was, and you've seen it just with with all of our comments and all the engagement from directors, which was a tax measure like what Sacramento has on the ballot, and we'll see what the voters say in November. No guarantee, obviously, of where this will go, but as I reflected on it, I wanted to make sure that if El Dorado County wanted to pass a tax measure in the future, that there was enough ability for my local, for my county to be able to put something together that would have to fit into the plan, but at the same time, allow us to have that authority over our own needs as well. And while, we could certainly had come to a place, in any future tax measure that wouldn't necessitate an MOU, there's also the pragmatic side of that, which is, how you actually get one of these passed and what those, and the folks that are going to help pass it, what they want. So, it's always going to be I think, a situation where you're going to have a lot of negotiations on one of these. And I think, again, at the end of the day, I think it preserved SACOG's ability to oversee these. You know, at the end of the day, the GHG levels has to still not surpass what we're looking at from a macro level. And all of these projects, you know, have to be able to meet our standards. So I'm comfortable with where we're at. Like I said, it's not a perfect deal, and I would never say that it would be, but I do think it's a very good deal. And again, I know there's a lot of questions about it, so I will shut up for now, and I'll hand it over to James. But I just wanted to give my comments on the front end. And James, I appreciate you for letting me do that.
Sure. And again, thank you, Chair Siragosa. And you've introduced him, but I want to make sure I reinforce that. And that's Mike Maurer from Best and Krieger. As you said, he kind of came in a bit late to this, but he's been incredibly helpful. He's here today just to be able to answer any kind of questions that you may have. So this is not a long presentation, but it is pretty dense in terms of some of the details here. So I'll do the best I can. As you remember, and I won't go all the way back to the beginning, but in May, we brought an analysis of the proposed initiative to you as the SACOG board. We flagged some issues, we flagged risks because of the incompatibility of some of the projects. I want to stress most of this initiative is actually compatible with our long range plan, but there's at least 26 projects that are not included. And that was the issue that we had flagged. In early June, Chair Saragosa and others were involved in the development of a draft term sheet. That was in front of you as the SACOG board at your June full board meeting. You approved that term sheet and you delegated authority to me to sign an MOU consistent with it. Since then, and it's been a very busy late June and July, I can assure you, as Chair Saragosa referenced, but there were the 4 chairs of SACOG, the board chair, the 3 committee chairs, that are up here on the screen: Jennings, Saylor, Kozlowski, Saragosa, along with the 3 other counties per the motion you made that was approved, representatives designated by Chair Jennings, the 3 counties that were not in that mix of the 4 chairs. So Placer County and Trinity Burris, Director Burris, Yuba County and Director Bradford, Sutter County and Director Harris. I'll come back to sort of the contents of the MOU and how we got to where we got and what it says. But the STA board did approve it last week, July 27th. The MOU was finalized and signed late last week by 3 parties. And the next step, among others, but an important one, is for the Committee for a Better Sacramento, the proponents of the initiative, to finalize their ballot argument, their yes argument, to reference explicitly this MOU. So next slide. And again, this is where I think Mike Maurer has been really helpful to remind us all in the initiative that was drafted, that has circulated for signatures, and by the way, has gathered enough and has been certified and is officially heading to the ballot on November the 8th in Sacramento County. The important thing, among other important things to know, is that there is already language in the initiative that actually calls out the importance of our regional 6-county long-range plan, our Metropolitan Transportation Plan, MTP. It calls out the importance of having meeting the greenhouse gas reduction target for the MTP, mitigation measures being developed for any projects that increase greenhouse gas emissions, and the importance of maintaining adherence, in other words, meeting the regional greenhouse gas target. So that is in the underlying initiative. The thing that we had flagged early on with the proponents, that this, while good, it needed some clarification. It needed some specificity and some detail. And that's exactly what we believe this MOU strives to do. So that is the language from the initiative. That's not the MOU, that is the underlying initiative, which is important because the MOU is really clarifying what is going to go before the voters.
Yeah, James, I just want to jump in real fast right there, because you're right. I mean, if everyone remembers, when this first came out, the language, while that GHG language was in there, it was essentially a self-attestation. So you could just say, hey, as this project, I'm attesting that this is fine. And there was no rules, there was no SACOG oversight of that self-attestation. So that is now within the language for that. SACOG does have that authority. So it's a big change from when that first language came out. And I just wanted to underscore that. Sorry, go ahead, James.
Can you all hear me? We good? I know what was happening there. Okay. All right, next slide. And again, Mike, please, Mike Maurer, please jump in here at any point. Okay, so in terms of the highlights here, I just described a little bit about how this MOU is really clarifying the underlying initiative. The language that was already in and will be in front of voters talks about reducing greenhouse gas emissions, talks about project mitigation, talks about the regional target, how important that is. And so this MOU really clarifies that. STA, the Sacramento Transportation Authority, and SACOG have signed that MOU, and that is in your packet. You don't have the signed version in your packet, but you have the MOU in your packet. That is verbatim the MOU that was signed. We've signed as parties to this agreement. The Committee for a Better Sacramento, the proponents of the initiative, have signed to confirm and approve. Happy to take questions on that. I think Mike Maurer can answer that as well. But that was something that we worked out with STA in particular. But we still believe the three of us, as those entities signing this agreement, is really important. I will say, just because I'm guessing there may be a question, the term sheet called for 4 parties, not 3. And the one party that hasn't signed this to date is the Southeast JPA Connector, Capital Southeast Connector JPA. We've been in conversations. David Sander, Director Sander on the board of SACOG, is their chair. He was talking about that this morning at the Transportation Committee, and I am talking with their Executive Director, Derek Minima. We believe that this MOU as drafted is very clear and explicit that that project is covered, even if right now the JPA has not signed on as a party. And I'll say a little bit more about that. It's not just the JPA country, though. Again, 26 projects not included for construction in the MTP SES are absolutely covered under this MOU, and we'll need to mitigate certain Caltrans projects. And in recital E, there's a whole set of recitals that were also proposed by STA, which we thought was a really good idea, again, to provide some clarification and some specificity and some transparency. So among those 26 projects, a number of Caltrans projects, and not all the Capital Southeast Connector, because as many of you know who've been veterans, the end segments, as we call them, Camera Road and White Rock Road, we have, not only are they in our plan, but we have supported financially, but the middle segment is not in for construction. And then there was a question too, which I think is an important one around, we say up here direct allocations, but that actually is, the language is monthly allocations for Sacramento Regional Transit and the Southeast Connector JPA. And I've had a couple of questions asking about if these are actually direct allocations. And I want to be clear that the STA collects the revenue. Any project sponsor under this initiative, if it passes and approved by the voters, must get approval from STA. STA has to approve a capital improvement program for the project sponsors. So that's a really important sort of specific piece of this. We really should be saying they're monthly allocations, because that's language in the initiative. As you know, we talked about this quite a bit in June. I know there were a number of questions about it at the board. That part of this MOU clarifies per the term sheet that STA will fund a SACOG analysis and a third-party analysis of the expenditure plan, including the projects that are not included in the MTP SES. The term sheet says, and the MOU, I think, even provides more clarity, that STA and the project sponsors will follow SACOG's recommendations. And that is because we are the only agency that has the greenhouse gas target and are responsible for meeting that on behalf of all 6 counties. That doesn't mean that if there is deviation, significant deviation from the third-party analysis, we won't open our books and show our work. We absolutely will. If we've missed something in there that a third-party analysis catches, we will come to the table. You have my assurance on that. And we will meet and confer. So next slide, just to wrap this up. Next steps. I mentioned Committee for Better Sacramento, referencing this MOU now that it's executed among the 3 entities, finalizing the yes ballot argument and referencing that MOU is critical. We talked a bit at the June board meeting about mitigation funds, and there is the potential for excess revenues as the term sheet and the MOU both spell out. And those excess revenues could be available and should be prioritized for mitigation. And that again is spelled out. Something else that MOU did that the term sheet didn't do is to say, if those funds don't materialize, because if you read carefully, I know you all have the term sheet and the MOU, that does not mean that those impacts should not be mitigated. It just means the funds aren't there. The mitigation has to occur anyway, again, to protect the regional, all 6 counties and the greenhouse gas target. So that was another clarification, I think, in the MOU that really strengthened it. We have made a commitment, each of us, to issue a public statement describing the MOU itself. I want to be clear, as you know from June, this is not SACOG endorsing or taking a position on this initiative. I do not recommend you do that. This is us describing the details of the MOU, much as I'm doing for you today. And then finally, and this is last but not least, I think it is going to be vital. And I said this in my remarks, my testimony at the STA last week. This process to work well, to allow Sacramento, the voters of Sacramento County, to consider a tax measure, and if they approve it, to make sure that they both get the funding for Sacramento County, but don't unduly harm the other 5 counties. We have to work really well and collaboratively with the Sacramento Transportation Authority and STA. That is critical and vital to all of this, is a good working partnership. I think we're off on a really good start to that. We have a new executive director over there, Kevin Busey, who we've known for a long time in various roles at Sacramento County and Elk Grove, but it really is important. And while I know I've gotten a couple of questions about the specifics of kind of what's next and how this rolls out, and if the initiative passes, how do all these things that are laid out in the MOU, how are they sequenced? How do they work? What's the role of the SACOG board and all of that? What I would suggest to you is we're already working with STA on a scope and a budget and a timeline for how this gets implemented. And so we will come back to the board with that scope, schedule, and budget. So that, Chair Saragosa, concludes my update on this information item. Again, thank you, and thank the other board members that have engaged in this, and happy to answer questions.
Great, thank you, James. And just one other thing I'll mention on all this is that the third party report will run parallel to the work that we're doing. So it won't be segmented in the sense that we're going to deliver our report, and then it's going to take another 16 months to get that third party report. It's going to run parallel. So it also should mitigate on any surprises. I don't expect there will be any, but even if there were, as this runs parallel, there should be quite a bit of conversation between SACOG and that third party as well. So it's a good, for whatever reason, and as James mentioned about opening the books or anything else, it's going to run parallel to what we're doing, and we'll see if there's anything off at that point, which again, I don't think there will be, but there won't have to be an additional wait time. So I just wanted to underscore that as well. And with that, I'll go ahead and open it up for any questions or comments. Wow, I thought there'd be at least a couple. Anyone going once, going twice?
I think we talked it all out at STA.
At STA, all right, that's fair enough, Sue.
I think the same thing. I think we've had so many conversations that fortunately all of our questions have probably been answered.
All right, I like it. All right, so with that then, Robert, do we have any public comments?
There's no public comment.
Okay, we'll bring it back to the board. So again, James, everybody else, board members, colleagues, thank you all very much for the amount of work that went into this, the thoughtful questions, and the ability to preserve SACOG authority in this arena. I think this was a hard road, I think, to go down, and preserve what SACOG is and how we work together. And so I just really want to thank colleagues and as well as staff of where we're at. And James, again, a big thank you, because I know this wasn't easy, and getting that MOU signed was huge. So thank you I know we had already given you that direction, but you had to still deliver on it. So I appreciate all the efforts. Okay, then we will go to information item number 6. And that is the 2024 draft blueprint pathways, land use assumptions, and Dav has his presentation this afternoon. So thank you, Dav.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, committee members. So as you mentioned, this is an information item to provide you an update on the 2024 blueprint land use assumptions for the 3 pathways to get to 2050. The board will use these pathways to better understand how the land use and transportation decisions that we make affect our future and affect the ability of our region to achieve our regional goals around the triple bottom line. Of course, the blueprint pathways, the eventual plan, they're going to include a whole suite of land use, transportation, policy components. For today's presentation, we're focusing in on land use. And sometimes it's easy to think of our blueprint as at its core a transportation plan. In some ways it is. Transportation's in the Metropolitan Transportation Plan title. But the truth is that the performance of the plan is really dependent on land use. So thinking back to the triple bottom line framework, we simply won't be able to make inroads on these goals without meaningfully tackling land use and being really strategic about how and where we grow as a region. So for example, to further equity, we need to keep our region affordable, which requires more smaller lot and more multifamily housing near jobs and services. To foster economic prosperity, we need to minimize how much time people are spending getting to and from their destinations. We need to maintain a strong fiscal health through efficient use of our existing infrastructure. And then we know that we maximize our environmental goals when growth is focused in existing communities where jobs and services already exist today, and at densities that support those shorter vehicle trips. They make transit more viable. Suddenly walking and biking become real options for your trips. In fact, the majority of the greenhouse gas reductions in our adopted plan and the performance are really attributable to smart land use policies. So what exactly does SACOG do as part of making our land use assumptions in the pathways? Well, we start with our regional growth projections, which the board adopted in February. The projections say that our region will grow by 263,000 jobs and 278,000 homes by 2050. It's about a 30% increase over today's numbers. We then go through a process of deciding where that growth will go as a part of the plan. First down to the community type level, which I'll get into a little bit later, and then eventually all the way down to the parcel level. That's the level at which our travel model is operating. How do we make those decisions? Well, attachment A in your packets describes in much more detail all the factors that we're thinking about across the regulatory, market, and performance side. The foundation of the assumptions are really that left column, your local plans and entitlements. So every 4 years, we catalog what we call a build-out inventory to understand what's allowed by your general plans, your specific plans, your zoning, and then all of that together forms the basis for our regional land use scenarios. In just a moment, I'm going to turn it over to Alex from our Caltrans grant-funded consultant who helped us do a really comprehensive update to our build-out inventory, which was great. We haven't been able to do this in about 8 years. So we have sort of an updated build-out inventory for this cycle. A key finding out of that analysis is that if you just add up all of the plan growth across the region, so if you were to staple together everyone's general plan, specific plans, all of that, it ends up having significantly more total capacity than what we're expecting to happen by 2050 when you look at our regional growth projections. So we kind of inherently have to make choices as to which growth to include where as a part of our plan. We also build into our assumptions a variety of market factors that seek to approximate things like financial feasibility of projects, whether there's a strong demand for that type of project in that part of the region relative to some of the other plans. And then critically, we have a set of policy and performance considerations that we have organized into the triple bottom line framework for this plan. And again, those choices that we make as a region around where and how we grow have monumental implications for those policy goals. Before we get into the details of the 3 pathways, I want to bring in our guest speaker, Alex Steinberger from Cascadia Partners. And he's going to talk a little bit more about all the work that we've done over the last year and a half to better understand the regulatory in particular, and to a certain extent, the market factors that go into our regional land use assumptions for this plan. So I'm going to man the slides, but take it away, Alex.
Thanks.
Welcome,
Dom.
Alex.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for your attention today. I'm Alex Steinberger. I'm a partner with Cascadia Partners. We're a land use planning and economics firm. And as Dov mentioned, we were the recipient of this Caltrans grant to help SACOG update their build out inventory. Just want to acknowledge Dov and his colleague Indrani Kumpella, who were really instrumental in helping us gather all the information that was necessary to do this for the region. Next slide. So we heard a lot already today about the MTP SCS, but as a refresher, sustainable community strategies are intended to guide local land use planning in a direction where we can reach our greenhouse gas reductions targets. And you heard Dov say that a large portion of the greenhouse gas reductions being claimed in the last plan come from land use strategies. But these strategies are only going to actually move the needle in greenhouse gas emissions if they are achievable, if they're actually, if the market supports those policies. And so what we find is that we're often towing the line between what's feasible and what's visionary. And to meet the really stringent greenhouse gas emissions targets set by CARB, we have to be pretty visionary. We have to do things quite a bit differently than in the way they've been done in the past. But we also want to make sure that we're finding that overlap with what's feasible. Otherwise, we're just putting a plan out there that doesn't have a lot of grounding in reality. Next slide. So Dov mentioned that calculating build out capacity is something that is part of every cycle of the MTP SCS. This time around, because of the funding that SACOG received from Caltrans, they were able to look at build out capacity in a little bit more nuance than what's happened in previous cycles. We looked at build out capacity, which is basically the envelope of everything that could be built in the region, in 3 different ways. First, we looked at what general plans say could be built in the region if everything was built out. Then we actually took a deeper dive into local zoning ordinances to see if that would yield a different result. And then we looked at what would be market feasible to build. So what does the market today allow to be built given the regulations that are in place? Next slide. So I'll go through each of those different kinds of build out capacity to give you a sense of what they consist of. In terms of gathering information, this was a pretty Herculean effort. You have 6 counties, you have 28 different jurisdictions covering those 6 counties. And so we went through and gathered information on every single general plan, almost all the specific plans, and many of the zoning ordinances in the region, and created a very comprehensive matrix that has all kinds of data in it about every jurisdiction in the region. Next slide. And we used that initially to calculate our first version of build out, which is this general plan build out capacity. And this is the quote unquote typical way that build out is calculated for most MTP or RTP SCS efforts throughout California. You basically take the general plan densities and heights and floor to area ratios and use those to estimate how much buildable envelope exists. And it's important to know this because, one, it's how the region calibrates its forecast for housing units and jobs. And it's also state statute that your MTP SCS consider these local plans and policies. So you have to have a good understanding of what each jurisdiction sees as its vision for growth. Next slide. But as we know, it's not always a direct one-to-one of what local zoning allows. And as we know, zoning is what really defines the specifics of what can be built. Zoning is intended to be identical to what the general plan says should be allowed. But with this deeper study of zoning, we can now look at the differences between general plan and zoning yields and actually focus our MTP SCS policies on fixing those issues. Because like I said, the goal is to have zoning fully implement what the general plan says should be allowed. Next slide. So this is an example of some of the information we got out of this analysis. The image on the left, titled Zoning Inconsistency Types, shows a snapshot of part of the region where we've actually been able to identify what specific zoning barriers are keeping certain parcels from being able to reach their general plan densities. So in this example, you've got high parking requirements and minimum lot sizes that are too large. And in the image at the right, we have what that means in terms of a reduction in yield from what the general plan would allow. So we can see how severe the barrier actually is in terms of reaching that final build out. Next slide. So the final way that we assess build out capacity is what we call market-based build out capacity. And as we know, the market often defines what actual built outcomes are. Zoning may say one thing, but the market may not be there to provide what the maximum that zoning would allow to be built. That's not to say that zoning shouldn't be more aspirational. Zoning should actually allow quite a bit more than the market does, but it is important to consider what the market can produce so that we can be realistic about how much capacity we think there is in a given region or submarket. It's also important to remember that this market-based build-out capacity is a snapshot in time. Markets are dynamic and they can change over time. So what may be true today, 10 or 20 years down the road, well within the time horizon of the MTP SCS, we may be looking at a different situation. It's also important to note that market dynamics and regulations are interwoven. A lot of times zoning can constrain what the market would otherwise provide. And so changes to zoning could actually create new opportunities for development that don't exist today, even though the economics are in place for them to exist. So knowing where within whatever zoning allows today, there is market strength that's strong enough to deliver certain types of housing is really important, because it will allow SACOG to pinpoint those areas where development is most likely to be feasible and give that important feasibility lens to the pathways that they create. Next slide. So in these next series of slides, I'm going to show you how the 3 different types of capacity that we've calculated differ in the same part of the region. So this map on the right shows the densities that we think are achievable based on what general plans say should be achievable. And again, this comes from our really extensive research on general plans and specific plans throughout the region. And darker colors here indicate higher densities. If we go to the next slide, we can see that same area under our zoning-based build-out capacity. And you can see some of those colors have lightened a little bit because of barriers to achieving what the general plan sets out that currently exist in some of these local zoning ordinances. And then if we go to the next slide, here we see the market is actually a pretty big constraint, mostly because a lot of those areas are already developed and would be unlikely to redevelop. But it does give us a clearer view of the areas where zoning, general plans, and what is feasible all intersect. And as a result, it's going to be the most constrained version of build out. Next slide. So I wanted to mention before we wrap up that this data set has other uses beyond just understanding build out. It also helps us understand where zoning may be getting in the way of what's feasible. And if policies were changed, there may be some new opportunities for housing production. This map shows areas where currently a fourplex is not allowed by right within local zoning ordinances. But if we flip to the next slide, these are areas within those same geographies where we think fourplexes would be feasible were they to be allowed. So it allows us to play out that what if. What if we change zoning? What if SB 9 were implemented or some other statewide mandate were implemented? What would that mean in terms of how much housing we might expect? So many uses to this data set beyond just the MTP SCS, and hopeful that it can be useful for jurisdictions as they update general plans or housing elements. Next slide. So in summary, we have this really detailed parcel level data set that covers build out 3 ways. We have our general plan build out, our zoning or highest and best use build out, and then our market-based build out. I think what's important to note about this, one, is that these estimates are preliminary. They are still subject to some pretty wide fluctuation as we refine our assumptions. They also don't include what's built on the ground today, which is almost 1 million homes. So that's important to consider. And also, an interesting takeaway here is that even under our most constrained build out, the market-based build out, we still have many times the dwelling unit capacity that's needed to meet growth projections to 2050. So even if we're being really, really conservative and taking that market feasibility lens, we still have plenty of choices to make about where we think development makes the most sense given our priorities in the triple bottom line. So with that, I will pass it back to Dov, who I believe wants to open it up to some questions.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. And I do have more content to talk through on the pathways, Chair. But maybe before we do that, it'd be a good time to pause for questions while we have Alex here.
Sure, absolutely. Questions for Alex or Dov? All right, I think you can go ahead. Keep on going, Dov.
Okay, great. So jumping back in here and to kind of recap what we've said so far, we have a regional number of units and jobs that we need to distribute as a part of this plan. As Alex just sort of walked through, even in the conservative, market-based build out, it's way less than what we actually have planned for at the local level when you staple everything together. So we want to keep the assumptions that we're making as part of the plan achievable by, factoring in those regulatory and market factors. And then, as Alex said, at the same time, we want to be visionary and strive to accomplish our triple bottom line policy goals. So it's a pretty complicated puzzle, right? And so in an effort to really inform the board's deliberative process and to try to solve that puzzle with some data-driven decision making, we're undertaking a scenario planning effort called Pathways. These pathways are going to explore 3 distinct land use and transportation futures, and they're going to serve as a learning tool for unpacking all of that complexity and some of the intersecting issues that we're going to be facing over the next 3 decades. Just to be clear, the pathways are not intended to be a menu from which the board will pick a preferred scenario. It's not, you're not going to be picking one of these to go into the plan. They're more about providing an opportunity to learn, to discuss what some of these policy choices are, talk about the trade-offs between those choices, and really formulate our regional strategies. For about 15 years, we've used this idea of community types as a geographic framing tool for talking about our growth as a region. For these community types, they're detailed with a lot more narrative in the beginning of attachment B, if you're interested. But the idea is here, we're trying to divide up the region into different categories. So I'll just describe them now. There are our core, what we call centers and corridors in red. And those are places, downtowns, main streets, near transit, near jobs, places that we're kind of expecting some heavier change over time. Our established communities are in gray. Those are places that exist today. There's a critical mass already, but we're not expecting dramatic changes other than sort of plans continuing to build out. There's our potential developing communities in purple. These are places where the region potentially could expand into. There's not a ton there yet, but sort of the idea is that local plans have identified, for the most part, these areas as expansion areas. And then rural residential is in yellow there. An even simpler version of this map, though, is to just combine those red and gray areas and look at where are our existing communities today. So these are places that, again, we already have a critical mass of homes and jobs the backbone infrastructure is largely built already. So when we think about our three pathways, one way to think about how compact or how spread out the growth will be is to just measure in the pathway what percentage of new homes or jobs are within these green existing communities. So here are the three pathways that we're exploring. It should look somewhat familiar from the framework that we provided back in March. They were created using the feedback we heard from you all in March, as well as all of those factors that we just discussed. The detailed land use assumptions by pathway are summarized in that really big table in attachment B. I know that's a little bit clunky, but it's hard to represent a regional land use forecast in a table. This is sort of a high level summary of it that you see on the screen though. And I think an easy way to think about the pathways on the land use side is that they go from dispersed development patterns on the left to compact patterns on the right. So think 2000 to 2008 type growth for pathway 1, with only about 40% of new housing happening in those existing communities. Most of that growth is large lot single family homes. It tends to be lower densities. Pathway 2 is intended to reflect the development pattern of our adopted 2020 MTP-SCS. And the idea is we're trying to get an answer to the question, what happens to performance if we use the development pattern from our adopted plan, but then update it with what's happened in the last 4 years. The growth is based on our new regional growth projections, which on a per year basis are slightly lower. But we maintain the general development pattern, right? So 2/3 of new housing, just like the last plan for pathway 2 will be in those existing communities. Pathway 3, we're calling inward expansion. It's the opposite bookend, and it really looks to explore a future where the vast majority of our growth is, smaller lot, multifamily housing, and the vast majority, again, is occurring in existing communities. The regional growth projections, this is an important point, remain constant across all three pathways. We're not varying the amount of growth, it's more the distribution. So as you can see, we're really trying to explore some fairly divergent futures for where that growth occurs and how much of it is happening in that existing footprint. You can also think of these pathways as an articulation of local land use policies as they sit today. So, jurisdictions with large amounts of planned developing communities growth are likely to have more growth in pathway 1 than in pathway 3. And then, conversely, jurisdictions with more compact capacity planned within their existing footprint likely to see more growth in pathway 3 than in pathway 1. That's just a general rule. There's obviously some nuance there. But by exploring these land use bookends, we're going to have a much better picture of what kind of future is best serving our regional goals and the triple bottom line. And we're actually going to have a whole suite of performance metrics for each of these goals across equity, environment, and economy to actually quantify and evaluate these pathways and how they compare. So we've been working on the land use assumptions for the better part of the year now. We did vet a draft version of the pathways with the whole spreadsheet to your staff. They had that in April, and based on feedback that we received from your staff, we revised the assumptions into the version that you see in attachment B. So you're already getting kind of a revised version here. In terms of next steps, we're in the process of taking that detailed spreadsheet and modeling the three pathways at the parcel level. And that does take some time. So you can expect a presentation of the results of that modeling in the early part of 2023. So in that presentation in the early part of 2023, we'd be asking for your feedback on which performance metrics you want to prioritize. We'd be using that feedback to develop a single draft preferred scenario. And the preferred scenario would be, again, synthesizing aspects of the different pathways, kind of drawing out what we see as the best performing components. But that you can expect next summer. So I know this is a very long process. We're sort of halfway through it almost, but that's what you can expect in the coming year. I'm going to stop there. I know that was a ton of information. I'm happy to answer any questions or clarifications you might have.
No, thank you, Dov. You're right. It's a ton of information, but I love the three paths to really get a better sense of, market, aspirational, and sort of in the middle between all of those. The concept behind that I think is really good for us as folks are going to have to be making these decisions about really what can we do, what should we do, and and then again pushing that aspirational boundary as well. So again, I'll open it up for any questions or comments. I'll start it off. I do have a question in regards to, so like for us, and in this, again, we're such a tiny city, but we did some overlay zones early on and that's what ultimately allowed us to move forward with 2 affordable housing projects. When the temperature was right, if you will, it allowed for the ability for the creation of those without necessarily changing the designation of those areas completely. Should something else happen in between, and it took us some time through the Great Recession to finally get to that point. But between like SB9 and maybe overlay zones or something, I mean, how much of SB9 or things like that are going into sort of the market, and I mean the overlay or the aspirational, and then I guess my second part of that is, this is something I just for my colleagues to think about is, and you've heard me talk about this before, I've always, I'm a big, obviously, believer in the way you move up in our society is through home ownership. And the one thing I've always had a real problem with when it comes to affordable housing and infill is that they all tend to skew towards apartments. And so you're not really creating that wealth that I think is really the one way where most people have been able to move forward. And I worry that, if 80% of what we do going forward is non-ownership, what that means as we discuss equity. And so just something for everyone to think about. And not asking for an answer on that from Dov or staff or anyone else, but I wanted the greater group to think about that aspect as well.
Sure. Yeah, great. Oh,
yes, and I saw Jan, you had your hand up as well. Go ahead and jump in, and then we can let Dov answer as well. Oh, go ahead, Jan. I saw you put your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. It was a great presentation and a lot to take in, and looking at the spreadsheet is, wow, a lot of information. So you mentioned that this is the first draft and that you showed it to staff. Are you talking individual jurisdiction staffs, or just talking about SACOG staff?
Yes, so we circulated what the existing conditions and the build out information with each local government planning staff starting, I believe that was in January. And then the first version of the net new growth numbers for units and jobs by 2035 and by 2050 for each of the 3 pathways, the bulk of that spreadsheet, that was what went to your local staffs in April. And then, so we've received a sort of a series of responses from local governments to amend that data. And it is sort of a work in progress. We always say that the numbers are never final till we adopt the plan. And so it's a work in progress, and we continue to mold them.
Okay, yeah, that's great. So you have another set of eyes looking at it, and in the sense of reasonableness, I would say. Thank you.
Sure. Would you like me to answer the SB9 question, Chair?
Yes, please.
Okay, sure. So yeah, and so it's a really good question because we're talking about build out and what is allowed, and technically now with accessory dwelling unit and SB9 law, you could hypothetically have 4 units on every parcel across the region. There's some stipulations involved there, of course, but I think the way that we try to look at it is, of course, not assume that every single family lot is going to have a 4-plex by 2050. That would be unreasonable and would not pass muster with ARB. But I think what we do is we look at sources. So the first for ADUs is we look at housing elements, which we're lucky in the sense that housing elements were just adopted in the last year. So in all of those housing elements, there were assumptions for how many ADUs would happen in the 8-year period. So we can annualize that and make assumptions for ADUs on a per year basis extrapolated out. There may be, and then for SB 9, I should say, obviously it was very new and kind of in process when housing elements were done, but there is a study from the Turner Center from UC Berkeley that looked at how many parcels in jurisdictions across our region would have would an SB 9 project be financially feasible, basically, so market feasible lots. And then of course there's only a percentage of those that will actually happen per year, because just because something is feasible doesn't mean a property owner or a homeowner wants to actually build a house in their backyard. So we do make assumptions for each of those. I think I would say, pathway 2 and it is largely, using those assumptions that I just mentioned, and then pathway 3 kind of is a little bit more optimistic on those slightly. Pathway 1 maybe a little bit less optimistic, kind of reflecting the themes of those different pathways.
Great, thank you, Dov. Yeah, that's what I was really trying to get to is I know theoretically, everybody can kind of meet their housing elements through some of these things, but I mean, the reality is we're not going to see, whole neighborhoods torn down and rebuilt with, with fourplexes everywhere. But knowing that still is a tool that can be used. And I actually kind of like that tool in a way, only because, again, I'm looking at those as probably more potentially a home ownership path, again, versus, packing people into large apartment buildings, which I just think, until we have something else besides monetary that brings people into a higher way of life, I still think home ownership's a key for now. So I'm always conflicted when it comes to affordable housing. And just one other thing for my colleagues to know as well, we on those 2 projects that we're moving on, we didn't qualify for some tax credits because we're actually penalized for being in a rural area. And so, those same projects, say in Sacramento, we probably would have scored higher. But just for the fact of where we are from a geography standpoint, we get lost out on those tax credits. And so it's frustrating when you're trying to do the right thing and we're actually penalized for where we exist. And so just a forewarning for any other jurisdiction, as you're going through that, you may have experienced it yourself already. So we're looking at other options. And again, and want to thank SACOG staff for, helping us well in that process in Placerville, but frustrating nonetheless as you're trying to meet these goals. Any other comments, questions? All right, well, Dov, thank you. I know there's a lot more to come and a lot for us to chew on. So colleagues, if you have any questions as time goes forward, I'm sure Dov will be available to answer those for you and or for your city or county staff. So again, thank you for the presentation today.
Absolutely, thanks.
Thank you. All right. We will then move on to item number 7. And this is the prioritization of the regional trail network strategy. And Ms. Cacciatore has this for us this evening, or this afternoon, excuse me.
Yes, this afternoon. Thank you for the introduction. I am Victoria Cacciatore, the project manager for the 6-county regional trail network and strategic development plan. And this is the last piece of a pretty lengthy planning process. So let's take a step back before I get into describing the last piece. We started this plan several years ago with the idea that there was something to the 500 miles of trails that we had in our region, that if we were going to be able to connect them, that would be something greater than the sum of its parts. And we were able to find others that shared our interest in connecting these trails, and were able to secure funding for a regional plan that would identify what it takes to connect this network. We're very grateful to Caltrans for funding this study through a strategic, or not a strategic, a sustainable communities planning grant, much like the path build out project mentioned in the item before this. So we were able to, with the funding from Caltrans, to comb through all of the plans from across the region to identify what goals and vision unified us when it comes to trails, and what's going to be the same values that we hold, whether you're, you know, a small city in Yolo County, or you are you know, the city of Sacramento. Like, what are the things that unite us all as far as what we value? And we were able to identify through that 6 goals that you could see across all of our active modes plans. Goals around increasing safety for people biking and walking, accessing all of the beautiful outdoor places that make our region unique and a great place to visit as well as live, and also an interest in how we could support healthy outcomes through increased opportunities to be outdoors, to bike places, to walk places, to experience parks. What we also learned, in addition to sharing all of these goals that could help shape our regional trail network, was that we also had inequitable access with our built network, that people who were living in lower income neighborhoods were 30% less likely to have a connecting trail near them than people in higher income neighborhoods. And that was in spite of one of those 6 goals being that people were very interested in how we could create equitable access and ensure that environmental justice considerations were front and center of many plans. To put an even finer lens on what these different goals would mean to identifying a connected trail network, in the spring of 2021, we conducted a public survey where over 3,000 people from throughout the region shared both what they liked about our existing trails and where they wanted to go on trails. So this was useful in helping us understand what it means to have a trail that supports economic vitality, because what we learned from these individual survey responses is that people wanted to be able to go to the social gathering centers in their communities where they could, you know, experience what it's like to be in historic Placerville, what it's like to go to Plumas Street in Yuba City. They wanted to be able to go to these places on a trail, to do so with their families, who maybe they didn't feel okay traveling with younger kids or with older relatives using on-street networks. But these are the ways that trails could help us connect to these areas that are important to people living here, and also creates an excellent opportunity to shift those car trips into biking trips, walking trips, scooting trips. And so using this input, we worked with city staff and county staff to identify first a draft regional trail network that was released with still some question marks as part of it in December 2021. And then working through all of the remaining question marks we had and public comments we received on the draft to identify the final network that you approved as the full SACOG board earlier this year in April. Oh, got ahead of myself there. And so what we have with that final network is not every planned trail, and it's not every existing trail. Of the roughly 500 miles of existing trails in the region, we're able to leverage close to 300 miles of trails to make these cross-jurisdictional connections, to identify a regionally representative network that accesses rivers and waterways, mountains, regionally significant parks, and connects to those community gathering centers, and achieves many of the goals that we were aiming for. This network in its entirety creates trail access for 406,000 people living in our region today that do not have access to trails. When you look at people that could also have access from the 7 locally identified study areas, you have the potential to add access for even 30,000 more people on top of that 406,000. It more than doubles the access to recreational assets across the region. It connects to job hubs and community gathering places across all 6 counties, provides over 100 miles of all ages and abilities trail alternatives to help people avoid traveling on high stress roadways if they're not comfortable with that. And it provides over 60 miles of trail alternatives to unsafe roads where there are documented crashes and people are not looking to travel on those because they feel unsafe, because they are unsafe. And lastly, it would bring down the inequitable trail access gap we had from that 30% difference to being within a 1% of the likelihood of access. And at the same time that the board approved the network that we were just looking at and discussing the benefits of, it also approved a framework for a qualitative prioritization that looked at different trail segments and gave a yes or no indication of whether it's going to help further the region's progress towards achieving regional plan goals. So providing those safe parallel access routes, providing the all ages and abilities routes, increasing access to households that currently do not have access, and so on. It also looked at prioritizing based on a project's potential to realize regional goals, such as crossing jurisdictional boundaries or other barriers, filling in smaller gaps between longer existing trails to form a continuous trail that people could travel to for longer distance. After projects were evaluated based on their performance potential, then did a scan to see where are these individual projects on a readiness assessment. So in other words, how much work has already been done at the local level to help get these projects ready for prime time or ready to be implemented. And then looking at how ready each project was, we then figured out how we could best focus regional coordination efforts and breaking that into a 0 to 5 year chunk, 5 to 10 year chunk, and then 10 years and up. So when I say that we had the information, or we drafted information on the project performance potential and the readiness, SACOG staff drafted those responses, shared them with local agency staff, and then used any updated information or corrections that they provided to us to then refine the information that you see in the attachments that say whether a project was high, medium, or low on regionalism, and whether it's gone through community engagement already or has a positive start on it, whether it's completed environmental clearances, and so on. So while SACOG staff drafted those, we gladly incorporated any and all feedback provided from local agencies to make sure that we were presenting the best information to you today. So as we were working between April and when we released a public draft of everything in this plan on July 1, we also worked with the cities, counties, and other engaged partners from community serving organizations to get their feedback on potential strategies that we identified that SACOG as regional convener could take on to help advance some of these projects that may not advance without a regional coordination effort. We received really helpful comments from local agency staff about how we could strengthen the recommendations on looking to secure additional funding options for both trail construction and maintenance, And then also identifying the need for security and safety considerations and individual trail design, and also the need for high quality trail crossings at barriers, and acknowledging that barriers can also just be a busy road. So we were able to fold those in even before we released all of this documentation for public comment July 1st through July 20th. And we continued to collect input from our partners during that stage too. So we received additional comments from counties and cities on that time, which we gladly incorporated into the final plan and the documentation of everything that we've done, which is in attachment D. So a quick high level of, we know that we need every trail in this network to come about for us to get those benefits that we have been referencing. 406,000 additional people with new trail access, over 60 miles of parallel connections to help avoid unsafe roadways. And for that reason, there is some level that we are able to offer as far as regional coordination and support for all projects, regardless of whether it's something that we feel or something that fell into tier 1 or fell into tier 2. So SACOG would look at how we could lead coordination efforts between cities and counties within our region, serve as an easy point of contact for Caltrans, facilitate conversations with Union Pacific whenever possible, knowing that those are very challenging conversations, and perhaps a regional entity is a good way to approach that. Also looking at ways that even within the region, we can help share project ideas and updates among agency staff, and how that information sharing can serve for a stronger regional trail network implementation. Also looking at ways that we can serve as the source of information about what's been coming online and how that's going to help us demonstrate progress towards implementing the regional trail network. And then one thing that was noted as very important, many people are familiar with SACOG for our role in this already, but how we can help support people seeking grants for individual efforts, such as if it's a letter of support, if it's mapping assistance, if it's application review, or whether it's any way that we're able to help strengthen the connections between our regional planning efforts and this trail network. But then I must step back to note that there are some projects that we noted may not move forward without a more focused coordination role from SACOG. And so we have the project split into tiers based on both their potential to move the region closer to achieving the regional trail network goals, and then also their potential to, their potential to achieve those regionalism goals that we mentioned, such as crossing barriers, crossing jurisdictional boundaries, filling in gaps between existing trails to form a stronger regional asset. So we had identified different strategies that we could do for projects that were tailored to where that project is in its life cycle, whether it's right at the finish line, it just needs to find construction funding and then it's ready to put shovel to ground, or whether it's still at the very early phases and they need to start scoping what a community engagement effort would look like to learn about how this trail could best meet the needs of the community that would be receiving it. So we have it broken out into these different years, and then eventually graduating up into the last batch of trails that are identified as part of this regional trail network. And also about that time will be more than 10 years out from where we are today. We need to consider that it would probably, or we might need to revisit the goals and outcomes that we've identified in this trail today, or the trail network today, to figure out whether it's still in line with what people living here want, and adapting to any other major changes that have taken place in what our region looks like, how we move, what's important. So noting that we have that phased approach of what SACOG would be able to offer to tier 1 trail projects and top tier study corridors, and then to tier 2, and then to tier 3. We're looking at how we could be even more focused with the data and analysis that we can offer, such as offering more project-specific analysis of how accessibility might be impacted by different trail projects that are proposed here, how we can better integrate the regional trail network with our other planning efforts, and how we can also serve as an entity that can help build those into other opportunities whenever we have a chance, such as when we're doing more of when we're doing project-specific assistance on other projects, how can we blend the two together? And then also assisting with the potential partnerships that each city or county needs when they are looking to start on a more challenging project. So that is the overall gist. I recognize that this has been an information-packed meeting. I'll close with that the Transportation Committee recommended this morning that the board approve the prioritization that is laid out before you, but want to still pause to offer time for any questions or clarifications or whatever you have.
All right, thank you, Victoria, for your presentation. Is there any questions? Yes, Vice Chair Clark-Kretz.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you, Victoria. I always look forward to your presentations. I love trails, and I know, everybody else does in our region. We're so lucky to live in an area that is so beautiful. This presentation is slightly different than the last one, though, I think, in terms of the timing of it all, because it seemed like it was an even longer time frame out. And have you sort of dialed into, because it seemed like there's a 15-year wait for a lot of this, and now I see that there's the 3 tiers. That's the one thing that has changed in terms of the timeline since the last one.
I want to make sure I'm understanding it correctly. So you're saying that in prior times there was a 15-year timeline, and on this we had is it saying that we had specific actions identified for 0 to 5 years and then 5 to 10?
Well, I feel like the last one, because I remember, it was a great presentation, just like this one. And then I remember that at the very end, it's like a lot of this is just going to be at least 15 years out. And I remember all, we were all just kind of like, oh my gosh, we really want to make sure this happens sooner rather than later. And then I noticed during this presentation, now you've got them in the 3-tier phasing. And is that a new part? That's my question.
Okay. I understand the question now, I believe. And I think that when we're talking about, or what I believe you're referencing from before is the life cycle of a trail. If you're starting from, I haven't talked with the community yet, and I want to know what they think. If they think that this could be a good option, what would a trail mean for connections for them? How would they use it? Do they not want it? That sort. And how that timeline could be up to 15 years. Okay. You can go quicker if you have a lot of support lined up or any number of things, but mostly if you have a lot of support lined up. And what we have with the prioritization today is a proposal of how SACOG is going to focus our regional prioritization effort, because we have finite staff capacity. We want to see how we can target our effort to help jumpstart trail development. And it's not that SACOG's implementing these, but we're trying to do what we can to smooth the path for them. And so it's not that every trail that's identified in tier 1 is going to be identified or is going to be complete in 10 years.
Right. No, I get that.
The idea, as we had seen it, was that within 10 years, the projects that we're going to be able to help will be on a path by that time. And so then once we get them started on the path, we would be able to then turn our regional focus to any others that are in tier 2 that have not started on their own yet. This is all specific to how SACOG focuses regional coordination efforts, which is to say that if Town of Loomis staff is on a faster timeline, there's that other raft of coordination activities that we would offer to Loomis staff, and then also working with PCTPA to ensure that your efforts are able to go as far as they can, as far as us offering grant technical assistance, the coordination to help with information sharing and how people are tackling these issues that face the entire region when it comes to trail implementation.
Yeah, and really too, we're excited about the Clover Valley situation that's coming up. And that is, you know, a big project that could potentially link Rockland and Loomis. And so anyway, thank you. I appreciate it, Victoria. We are very excited about any potential for any trails. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other comments or questions? All right, seeing none. Vic, just a point of order. I know it says approve prioritization, but that was probably for transportation as an action item. For us, I think it's just an informational.
I appreciate the clarification. Yes, you hit the nail on the head.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Robert, do we have any public comments on this item?
No public comment.
Okay, great. Well, Vicki, again, thank you for the update. I think I'll echo Jan's comments. You know, we all want to see this move forward as quickly as possible. I love the idea, and you know, I have friends that bike from Auburn down to their office in Sacramento and then take Amtrak back to Auburn, you know, for their work. Not every day, but almost, but 2 or 3 times a day. And I have much accolades for them for being able to do that. I mean, I probably won't be that adventurous, but I'd love to see more connectivity in our regions because we have such beautiful trails throughout it already. So looking forward to our next update as well. So again, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I recommend you talk to Director Gallardo about e-bikes.
That's right. That's right. That's better, Dan. That would be more my speed. Yes. Go ahead, Jill. All right. So we'll go ahead and move on to item 8. I know we got a few minutes left here. And item 8 is our strategic planning update with James. I don't know, did James want?
So yeah, Mr. Chair. So James actually had to head over to a meeting with the Strategic Growth Council, but
Gotcha.
I'll be stepping in to give a presentation on this. So
Okay.
yeah, so directors, the last time that we adopted a strategic plan at SACOG was back in 2010. And so those of you who've been around for a little bit, we've done board retreats about every 2 years since James arrived 5 years ago. And really that's been building up to a strategic plan, which we are hoping the board will take action to adopt this October. We're working with Daniel Kaufman, who you may remember from the board retreat that you had in April. And he's helped us come up with the vision and mission statements that you see on the screen. So we had a lunch meeting for board members who are interested to just give some informal feedback earlier today before this goes to the Strategic Planning Committee at the end of the month on the 29th. But really, we want to just give you the opportunity here in the last couple minutes of the meeting to let you know, to see if you have any feedback on these proposed vision and mission statements. I think I can kind of summarize what we heard at the Transportation Committee and the lunch meeting, which is that, you know, the vision seems to capture a lot of what people on the board are thinking, you know, reflects what SACOG is trying to do. And as we went into more depth at lunch about, the vision is really about what SACOG is contributing to. So it's bigger than SACOG as an organization. The mission is specifically what we as an organization are going to do to contribute to that, right? So SACOG isn't responsible for everything that contributes to a vibrant and thriving region, but certainly that's what we're aiming for. And so these three mission statements that you see here are kind of an articulation of how we're going to narrow the scope of what we're doing. What you'll see in the full strategic plan is 4 goals that come out of our 2020 MTP SCS. And so we'll have more details about specifically the types of activities we'll do, but we wanted to share with you these mission statements and again, see if there's any initial reactions that you want to share with your colleagues today.
Thank you. Any comments or questions on these initial mission statements?
I have one.
Yep.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe how much I'm talking today. I'm very sorry. Thank you guys for allowing me to talk. So with the vision, the first thing that I think of is I wish it said a vibrant and thriving Sacramento area region for all. It just makes it feel like it's focused all on Sacramento and it's the whole area. And that's the only thing that just came to my mind.
Sure, thank you.
Good point. Yeah, I mean, I'll go ahead, Director Frost.
I attended the lunch meeting, but I got there a little bit late, so I was only, I listened. Some of the comments that were brought forward, I thought were pretty astute. Director Kozlowski made a comment about how option number 2 sort of contains words that hold us to a place in time. And if this is something that is going to be, you know, that's sort of a mission statement that is ongoing, it might be better to be more, I'm not saying the same words he said, but more generic, like number 1, where it is concise and leaves out, you know, words that maybe identify a period in time. And there were several comments. I think option number 1, I think is my favorite, and I think it could include. I mean, it's you know, when I think of a mission statement, I don't think of it as being going into the detail of it, but leaving room for different times and markets to interpret what's there and move forward with, you know, plans of the day. And option number 1 seems to just kind of give a higher level, but it's very, you know, accurate as to our goal to make sure that all the areas in the region are prosperous, that we're working together to create an equitable, sustainable, prosperous growth in every area, even though each area is different, you know, in and of itself. I don't know if I'm saying this very well. So those are just some of the thoughts that I have. I think they're all good. I think all of those are good, but my favorite is option 1.
I think that makes sense, Director Frost. I get what you're saying, and the idea that we don't freeze ourselves in a point of time. I didn't hear I wasn't on there either, but or I wasn't on. But that makes sense to me too, that it would be something that's more, I'm trying to think of the right word myself, but you're right, that doesn't freeze you in time for a certain thing, but is really spans that time frame, which I do think option one provides. I probably have to think about it a little bit longer on all three, but my first blush too is I do like one for the simplicity, but also because it does capture what we're about. Any other comments on the vision statements, vision and mission statements? All right, seeing none. Robert, do we have any other public comments on this item?
No public comment.
And Mr. Chair, if members do have things they want to provide feedback on these statements between now and the 29th, we'd welcome those. I know it's hard to react in real time, but appreciate all the thoughts today. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we will go ahead then, and so we have 4 minutes left. So if anyone has anything to report out that they'd like, now would be the time. Like I said, I will bring back my recommendations if anyone goes to Baja for the via the Guadalupe wine region. So I will bring that back for our next time. Of course, you should always come to Placerville to do your wine tasting anyways, but that's a whole other issue. All right, so seeing nothing else, there is a receive and file item. So I will go ahead and have you all read that at your leisure. And with that then, at 3:26, I will go ahead and adjourn today's lunar meeting. So thank you, everybody, staff and colleagues. Have a good weekend.
Everyone.
Bye.